Hello, so it is Sunday. It's my cousin's birthday, so in like about an hour, we will be going to this, steakhouse slash all you can eat buffet, and I'm pretty excited. I already, have stored some space, inside for that. But I'm excited about that. Also, something exciting that happened is that I finally finished chapter 5. It still needs polishing, but this, time that I'm going through this draft, mostly to kind of like fill in the gaps. So the next one I'm going to be kind of like making things better, because there's a lot of like things that I could do, but I was kind of like already tired of that chapter because I've been working on it like on and off for some weeks. So yeah, I kind of like wanted to go to the next one, and I'll probably work a little bit on like my on the novel chapter 6 once I'm done with this video before we leave, because I don't know, like it's kind of like fresh, so I'm excited about like the prospect of writing. So like that's pretty good. But that all that aside, I am kind of I wanted to continue talking about what I was talking like last in the previous video, which was that we kind of like expect people to be kind of like ready, and we don't give them like room to grow, basically. And I ended up talking mostly about like a lot of like experiences that I had with people kind of like being perfect and doing things that are harmful. So basically, like that was kind of like the angle. But I wanted to look at it more internally. I feel like I sometimes have these expectations that I should be readier, and in a way, like I kind of, for example, I'm readier right now than I was when I was 18. So like I've grown like that way, but there's still a lot of room for growth. There's still like a lot of things that I have to like pay attention to, and it's okay if I kind of fuck up here and there. I think that the important thing is for me to learn, and kind of like move on. But sometimes it's just like very small things, for example, like I said this thing and maybe I shouldn't have said that, or sometimes like it is it can be something bigger, something more significant. And I don't know, like I'm still learning. Like that's the thing about like people, we're constantly growing. This reminds me of like that thing of like the age where your frontal lobes stops developing, and we used to think that it was the whole that 25 thing, but then we kind of like realized that that was that's pretty much the age where they stopped doing the study, which means that very likely we are constantly growing. And and I did feel a shift when I turned 25, to be honest, but I think it's just like maturity, like you grow as a person, and things, they become easier to handle. For example, people are always like something that I think the trickiest like everything I have to do is handle people, and I'm at a point where I'm handling it better. I'm also kind of like avoiding, like if I can't avoid interacting, like I will, it's just kind of like picking your battles, basically. But still, I feel like there are so many things I'm not ready for. Something that came to mind when I was thinking about this is that my parents are gonna die someday, and I'm not ready for that. I don't. It feels like I never will be, because they are not only my parents, and I mean, I'm very fortunate that I have very, loving and supporting parents. Not everybody would relate to this feeling of, like them dying. Because, for example, I talked about this before, like one of my grandmas, like I'm totally, that sounds horrible, but, like she's going to pass away. She's in her 80s, so, it's coming any day soon. And I don't know if I'll be affected by that. I feel like that is, something that I have to maybe work on, maybe, because everybody's going to be sad, and I mean, I'm not going to be out there parading the fact that it doesn't bother me as much, but anyway, like I got sidetracked, so let me just get back to oh yeah, by the way, I think I mentioned the other day that I wanted to kind of like resume my exercising, which I stopped because I was sick, and then physically weak, and I've been able to. I'm kind of like on the roll. I already done it. I've done it, my exercise routine today. Now the only thing I kind of like wanna improve in my life is like stretching out. I want to stretch out more. I want to be more flexible. I want there are some things that I kind of like. They've been kind of like occupying my headspace lately. Just for example, been able to kind of like stretch the wall, kind of like like having my my leg, my left leg, straight up, and then, kind of like raise my right leg, like, so it would be yeah. So I kind of like and this was one of my resolutions for this year. I started January, and I was doing it. I was like stretching out every day, and then I stopped. So I have to get back to that. But back to what I was saying, there are things I'm not really ready for. Like I feel like the real world can be kind of like a scary place, and I've been prepared for me to get some things done, but I never really had to kind of like go out there and do them. So there is this fear that I won't be able to handle it, and what would happen, because I really value my independence, so I should be able to do everything. But sometimes I just say to myself, and I'm like, I don't know where to start from. Like I think that right now, like in theory, I have like a notion, I have kind of like a how to guide of what I would do. But I do think that like if whenever something would happen that would require me to kind of like I was gonna say perform, which in a certain way it is what it is, but it required me to kind of like step up and do something. I don't know, like where I know, I think I would kind of like crazy in a way, because where do I even start from? And there are some things that for example, financially, I worry about things because if I was completely on my own, would I be able to kind of like just sustain myself, because things are expensive, and that's kind of like life. Because for example, my parents, like I live with my parents, so like that is an expense that I don't have. But if I were to live alone, I would have to add rent to the mix, and that would just really fuck up my my finances. So like it's just stuff like that. It feels like I can't really live on my own, and this also has to do with like my mental health. So that is also a different angle that I have to look at. There's something about that's something about, because for example, this past few days I've been having some negative thoughts, some thoughts of death. And for example, yesterday, like when I was I was laying in bed, all those thoughts, they came, and I planned, and I decided, this morning I'm kind of like doing better, in terms of I'm doing better in terms of like kind of like craving the end. But still, I'm like, okay, it's going to, like, the end of the day is going to come, and I'm going to have those thoughts again. I've already contacted my psychiatrist, but yeah. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't please me to say this, but I do need a little supervision sometimes. I need people to be kind of like on the lookout for for kind of like where I am at and what I can and might do. But I don't know. So like this makes me feel like kind of like unprepared. It feels like I'm not ready for that. Like I think about this often. Like if I lived alone, like there would be nothing, no one stopping me, from a lot of like different things. So it's kind of like an interesting kind of like look for me to have over myself. But yeah, so basically, I kind of like sometimes I feel like I already expect, myself to be ready, because, like we have different stages in life, like there are different moments where, things happen. So I'm nearing my 30s, so, like it's going to be a new challenge. Like new challenges are going to come, and ultimately, like the positive thing that I can take from my life so far is that like I have been able to overcome everything, everything that came my way. So like there is there's reasonable it's reasonable for me to think that I will also be able to kind of like overcome the other things that come my way, because also like I have a really good support like network. So like that is also very yeah, like that is that is in itself kind of like a win, because you have to open yourself to people for them to be there for you. And I think that historically I have struggled with that. I have kind of like like pushed people away. Naturally, this past few years I have changed. I started to welcome people's presence and their kind of like their like the weight that they bring to my life, because it's also because you have to think about the things that you're going to lose. Like you're thinking about like what you're coming to, and it's coming to an end, and it's just you know, like that's like the issue with this past few days, because you know everything that I have that you know was kind of like an anchor, it wasn't really you know like working for me. I was very kind of like affected by you know like this the sense of nothingness that you have, that like nothing really matters. So for example, if I die today, I will never have finished my book, and that is you know something that I didn't care about. College, I finally found you know right footing, and I'm kind of like finally you know in a course that you know measuring something that I'm kind of like invested in, and that also didn't kind of like affect me. And then I was thinking about my tattoos, like, oh, if I die today, I won't be able to get more tattoos. You know, I already have like an appointment scheduled for you know August. So you know that was you know also something that I was that was kind of like, yeah, whatever, I will never be able to eat again, you know, like I'll never be able to try new things. And that was also kind of like meh, that was like whatever. So you know like there are a lot of things that kind of like that there is something that people say, where there's a will, there's a way. So you know even if like those things, they were not really affecting me the way that I wanted them to, it's still you know like there's something there. So if I have, but that's the thing, I didn't have a will, so there wasn't a way. That's kind of like where I was at. But yeah, but back to what you know I was you know saying before. I you know as I said, like sometimes I feel like I am not doing a good job you know like existing. You know I feel like there's a lot of like you know flaws you know in my system, and I don't always know how to fix those issues. You know I kind of like I carried my life like one day at a time, and so sometimes like you just postpone you know having to deal with it. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna ignore this tomorrow, you know, or the next time that you know something happens, I will be kind of you know I'll be kind of like thinking about this. And this is something that you know kind of like applies to so many things in my life. It's kind of like postponement, but sometimes like it is necessary, because you know like the thought of facing those things is really demotivating, and it gets me in the wrong headspace. So you know I kind of like I have to kind of like push some stuff you know away, and there's no right or wrong way of, I mean there are wrong ways for you to handle you know like your trauma, for you to handle you know like the things that happen to you, that you know like the you know like whatever the things that are happening right now. But there's no necessarily right way. You just have to find a good strategy, you know, something that works for you. And that is sometimes you know like the biggest issue that I find, you know, is kind of like finding strategies, because particularly when you know I don't have a will to live, because then I don't want to come up with strategies, I just want to die. And that is you know something that you know I have to work on. But on the topic of expecting people to be kind of like born ready, it's for me kind of like a double-edged sword, because on one hand it kind of like excuses people's you know nasty behavior, you know like their mistakes, and you know like their kind of like you know whatever it is that they do that has you know like negative repercussions, negative consequences. So I want to kind of like find a line, you know, like so I don't get too lenient, but also because that's the thing, like there's no risk of me being too lenient, because I'm already kind of like I already come to the conversation with like a bunch of rocks in my hand, you know, to throw at those people. And so yeah, so there's I have to find like a middle ground of you know like me kind of yeah, middle ground of me kind of like not you know like letting people's actions, because that's ultimately like the thing, you know, like if I let people's actions affect me, I'm kind of like you know I'm already losing, because there's just so much shit happening all the time, and everybody is kind of like everybody has something to say. Everybody, particularly right now that you know everybody has a platform, you know everybody has something to say, and a lot of those things. Because the thing is that ultimately you could argue that like, oh, they're just saying those things, but you know the issue is that those words, they influence people. They kind of like either play into their own misconceptions, or they kind of like shift the way that they behave, the way that they see the world, and that can have no negative repercussions. For example, it can kind of like shift the way that a person is going to vote. And you know that's the thing, it's not just like one person, it is kind of like a mass thing, you know, is everybody is kind of you know like there is kind of like an issue with you know the way that things are distributed, you know. And it's kind of like it's really upsetting, you know, to me that you know like bullshit can kind of like convince people you know to kind of like think differently about the world. And that is, so that's pretty much what I mean when I said that I'm already kind of like arriving with like all the rocks in my hand to throw. I mean, I don't really do anything because I don't have social media, don't have any interest in having, I mean, I used to have it when I was younger, but like I've been free from it for years, and I intend to continue to be free, so I'm not really doing anything. It's more of an internal thing, and like that's the issue, because it is affecting me negatively. It's making me angry, it's making me upset, it's kind of like shifting my view of the world. Suddenly, I'm kind of it is making me kind of like a little bit more despondent, because I'm like, okay, people really do think this, they really do believe this, they defend this, and ultimately, like I think that the angle that may get me to be a little bit more sympathetic, not that I want you to be sympathetic, like I really don't, but it's just that it's the angle of selfishness. Because why? I mean, sometimes you see people defending things, and I'm like, why are you defending this? This is so against you, it's going to harm you directly. But there is the fact that but then there's a lot of people who kind of like benefit from things staying the same, or they changing in a certain direction. So it's kind of like, okay, so I guess why you're here is because this helps you, this benefits you. And I don't know, it doesn't really help me be more sympathetic, but at least I can relate to that, because I talked about this before. I think that the reason why I'm so invested in kind of like the general kind of like well-being, although to be fair, like it isn't so much me caring about specific people, it's more me caring about the group of people that I'm a part of, or that I'm not. But because I have those experiences, I can sympathize, and I can not only sympathize, but I can be empathetic about those issues, those struggles that people have. And it is interesting, because there is no, as I said, like there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, there is actually a wrong answer, so let me clarify it. But we're back to the thing of like, how do we fix this? Like, what do we do? And I don't know, I don't have a solution, because what I could have tried is like talking to people, but I used to do that, and that led nowhere. So I'm kind of like not doing that before that again, like I'm not really trying to kind of like change the world anymore. And it's kind of like it's kind of like this very paradoxical thing, because on one hand I'm like upset, not paradoxical, but like there's a dichotomy of like a human being, because on one hand I'm like upset about things getting worse, but at the same time, like, what exactly am I doing? But that's also the question, like, what exactly can I do? I have like no impact on anything. So I feel the urge to kind of like so I think like this is another example of like me feeling like I should know better, because I am kind of like stuck here, and there are this mixed feelings, because on one hand I feel bad because like I'm not doing anything, but on the other I'm also like I have to preserve my mental health, I have to preserve my sanity, so I'm not getting invested, and I still, it feels like I should be doing something. So a part of me is like, how do I figure this out? I wish I had already figured it out, but I haven't, and I'm kind of in this like I'm like disappointed, not disappointed, but I am thinking about I'm thinking about like, I feel like I should do better, but like I don't know exactly how can I do better. I'm kind of like stuck this way, and it's interesting because I don't know why, but I just had a memory from like this one time I was traveling with my mom, my grandma, and my uncle, my mom's brother, and we kind of like, I remember specifically a place that we went to, took pictures, and then there was this uncle specifically that I'm thinking about, the shit he says, and like it is kind of it's kind of yeah, I just had another memory from like something that has nothing to do with me, but I don't know, I just remember that, and it kind of like fed into like the whole the world is lost, because if I can't convince the people in my life that they're wrong in their ways, then how exactly am I going to convince like a stranger? What exactly can I do? Also, like, what should I do? Like, there's always an issue, because like, should I do something? And the answer feels like it's a yes, but like what, number one, but also like at what cost? Because it feels like it would cost me my sanity, as I already mentioned. So I'm kind of like stuck here where I'm not doing anything, but I feel like I should be doing something, but if I do try to do something, it's bad for me. So I don't know. So yeah, so back again, like I'm being very selfish, so I can kind of like relate in a certain way, I guess, to other people being selfish as well in their beliefs, because you can't really force people to not be selfish. That is something that usually religion tries to kind of like counter, but it doesn't really it doesn't really work. So I'm trying to say it doesn't feel like it works, and very likely it doesn't. So as I said, and also like I feel like I'm being what people call it a Debbie Downer, because things can get better. Things, you could argue that depending like where you're looking at, that they are getting better. But I'm not seeing it, or maybe it's not that I'm not seeing it, but I'm only seeing the negatives, and that is kind of like getting me to, yeah, like it's kind of like impacting the way I see the world. But it's also, like whenever I'm kind of like in my feelings, I think I have a tendency of being a pessimist. Like I feel like some people are very optimistic, and I feel like I'm very pessimistic. When I'm kind of like normal, somewhat stable, I think that I have a more balanced view. But like when I'm kind of like struggling, it's one of those things that just everything is just piling on, and I don't really know how to break free. But kind of like moving on, I want to talk about kind of like because I feel like when I say we expect people to be ready, and maybe like we should give them room to grow. The first thing that comes to mind is a lot of like very bad examples. Like lots of cases where like that didn't pan out the way that it should have, or people expected. But it is one of those things where like as I said, like maybe I should be focusing on more positive things. But it's kind of hard. This is something that my dad was telling me yesterday when we were kind of like, my parents, they pray with me every night before I go to bed. And he was kind of like saying that I should focus on, like kind of like the positives. It's one of those things that's like easier said than done, because whenever I'm like down, like I don't want to think about the positives. I want to think of the negatives, so that I can feed into like the idea, and I get to a point where like I'm kind of like craving the end. So that is kind of like where I am at with this whole situation. And today I have like, as I said, like we're going to the all you can eat steakhouse buffet thing, and I'm excited. As I said, this is pretty much what I'm looking forward to. I mean, we only learned about this yesterday, but I've been looking forward to this. I think the reason why I didn't do anything yesterday evening is because I wanted to have this moment first, like enjoy myself, kind of just vibe. There is nothing I don't know. So I guess like food still has an effect. So there's that. But I don't know. I'm so excited. But that's the thing. Like, what happens after we come back? Because the thing that's exciting me will have passed. So like, what will I do? What's happening tonight? I don't know. I don't have any kind of like. I don't have an explanation. I don't have because I feel like it's one of those things that when I get very pessimistic and I start to get down, I kind of like like I can kind of like forsake that state. I can't actually kind of like think of the positive things, but like there's, I don't know. I was going to say there's so much to live for, but like, do I really believe that? Like that is something that is there's something there, like there's gotta be a way. This is another thing about like me not being born ready. Like, why can't I counter these feelings, these situations? Why am I always affected? And I was again like, I don't have an answer. And naturally, like there's like the chemical biological things happening that could kind of like really shift my like the gears that I'm like operating in. But it is I don't know. There's something like that. So you change the medication, and a lot of the time like that helps, that works. But sometimes like it doesn't, or at least like it takes a little bit longer. But there's a risk, because depending on how long it takes, there's more room for me to do something, for me to try something. So there is. So yeah, I'm kind of I'm on the fence on this one, because a part of me really wants to kind of like find joy in life, so I can trail, I can thrive, so I can have like some good trails, and the other part is just like, no, this is kind of like the end, like enjoy you while you can. And I don't really know what to do about that. I mean, I feel like I have strategies, but like none of them works, but it also feels like I'm not trying hard enough, but that's the thing that I said, like when I lose my will to live, like I don't want to try hard enough, I don't want to try at all. Kind of like just embrace, like the nothingness, this kind of void that, it's yeah, it's kind of crazy how like every time something, because I just said the void and I remember something, and it's kind of crazy because I feel like if I had being okay, I would not have remembered that, because this thing that I remembered is something that that is kind of like adds up to the pile of bullshit, pile of shit of like that's kind of like inherent to humans. I was like in chapter 5, I was kind of like talking a lot about like humanity, what it means to be human, what differentiates us from like other creatures, other animals. And it was kind of like a good opportunity for me to kind of like reflect on what I think, because I'm talking about fantasy, so like we're dealing with monsters and fictional and fantastic creatures. So and so like that's kind of like where the conversation was at. But this kind of like does translate to kind of like where I am at right now, which has to do with like the fact that the way that I look at people, because it's very easy for you to dehumanize somebody, and I think that everybody does it to some extent, like looking at them, at the others. And sometimes like it's understandable, because like somebody hurts you, like you don't want to see them, you see them as kind of like monster of sorts, particularly depending on what exactly happened, because sometimes it's something pretty kind of like some mistakes are kind of like easy to forget and forgive, but some are kind of like it's beyond hard. Some of them, like although I will say that regarding like my trauma, the one from when I was 13, it's interesting because I feel like I have I forgiven? I don't know if I have forgiven that individual, but I definitely, it doesn't hurt so much anymore. So I'm kind of like living, I'm at this point where I am. I don't know, but like it doesn't. I think the whole experience doesn't hurt so much anymore. But whenever I think about my religious trauma, like that one is harder to forgive and forget. I think it's also because it is something constant and consistent. It was not just one situation. Because it's also kind of like hard to forgive. Because I think the hardest thing that like was hard, that was kind of like tough for me to forgive with like that 13 year old trauma, is the fact that I'm that like how it changed my life for the worse, and how like I missed so much of life. I kind of like I didn't see opportunities where they were, so I was really kind of like really affected. Like not only, it was not just like that moment that it affected everything after that. And I finally at a point where I think I'm kind of like okay with where I ended up at, so I can look at those situations and feel like okay, it is what it is. But yeah, but as I said, like those religious traumas, the religious trauma, which involves a lot of like different situations, like that is hard, because I feel like in certain ways it still affects me, because that is, whenever I see somebody, for example, doing something, or saying something negative, like towards, myself, a group of people I'm part of, or whatever, like I remember that pain, and I feel like, okay, this is not just this one person. There's an entire group of people who's kind of like, who are kind of like behind this, like very harmful ideas, very harmful situations, because that is something that affected me, because because like my the trauma when I was 13, it was also there was also like a religious aspect to it, because I think I talked about this before, but like basically I ended up, because of the things that were said, I ended up being in a vulnerable place, and that place led to that whole situation. So part of me is like, this happened to me, this could have happened to other people, this is going to continue to happen, maybe not this extreme dramatic, but like this is going to continue to affect people. There's nothing, so even like if the people kind of like they ask for forgiveness, or like they kind of like apologize or whatever, it still is kind of like, what exactly does that mean? Because you're still saying those things, you're still doing those things, you're still kind of like kind of like saying all those things to impressionable children, and you're just making them kind of like hate themselves and feel like they don't fit in, that they don't belong, that they're not kind of like right, there's something wrong with them. So it's kind of hard to forgive, because to forget, or to forgive, because it's like you're still doing the thing. Your apology kind of like it means nothing. You're sorry that I ended up going through that experience, but you're not doing anything to prevent this from happening again. And also has to do with people kind of like maybe not putting two and two together, because like I can see how this whole situation was kickstarted by like preaching, by by sermon, where like certain things were being said, But like people, they don't necessarily they think about the end product. Like that situation, the extreme situation that happened, and they're like, okay, we're gonna, we're going to to kind of like do something about this so it's not going to happen again, but you're not really dealing with the root of the problem. And that is something that is kind of hard because I basically see the same mistakes being made again and again, so it's kind of hard for me to forget. I mean, I'm doing that thing that I mentioned before, where I'm just kind of like removing myself from situations, and this helps because I'm not really seeing that kind of like happening again. But it is something, there's something to be said about the fact that like people are being I don't know. I'm just thinking about myself and like what happened, and maybe like it's not going what's going to happen. It's not exactly what happened to me, but there's still like all the feelings that come from like you being kind of like othered by people, particularly when you were a kid, and particularly when you were kind of like in a place that was supposed to be a safe space for you. That's kind of like my relationship with the church. It is something that like it wasn't for so many years. I was so uncomfortable that there, and it has to do with like the memories and the pain that I had to kind of like work through. And right now I can go to church, like to because I think like going to a random church is kind of easier, but like going to like the church I grew up in, and it doesn't hurt. It's kind of like I'm over that trauma, but it doesn't take much for me to feel like like there is more that for me to kind of like remember those things that happened to me when I was a kid. And right now I can go there and all, but I feel like I can't spend too long there because I may start there without kind of like any type of it's kind of like I'm no longer kind of like hurting. I feel kind of like I've healed from certain traumas that I have, but still, like if I stay there long enough, it's kind of like those memories come back, and it can start as like you having positive memories, but like it's kind of like it ends up translating into something at a certain point. Like the negative ones start to kind of like appear, and then you start to kind of like think about how things have not gotten any better, and that they're still perpetrating like so many types of like like bullshit. Yeah, honestly, like I'm not even talking about beliefs or whatever. Like if you're not hurting anybody or yourself, like for whatever it is that you're into, but like I think about like socially the things they're kind of like incentivized, they're kind of like people, the things people are encouraged to do, the things that and like those kind of like fuck me up a little bit because like I've had those experiences, because a lot of like the things that people are doing, I was doing them when I was that age. And it was interesting because I didn't fully understand at the time kind of like what was happening in my brain, because I would feel the discomfort, but I didn't really get where it was coming from. It didn't help that specifically talking about that trauma from when I was 13, like I had like kind of like amnesia for many years regarding like the whole situation. It was only like a decade after the incident that I was able to talk about it aloud. So yeah, so basically like that in the so I wasn't comfortable because there were disconnections in my brain, and particularly like sometimes when some things were said, they I like it really got me to kind of like struggle. I struggled to be there, but I feel like I was so used to discomfort because it's also something that the fact that not only like my because it affected my relationship with religion, with politics, with social issues, because suddenly some things, they became more important to me, and some things became associated with like the traumas that I had. So basically I was I don't know, I was kind of like thrust in the middle of this situation, and I didn't really have a way out. So I was kind of, because I was basically everywhere. It was painful because I grew up in a religious context. So like it was, religion was not just something that was happening at the church, it was happening at my home. So like everything made me uncomfortable. It made me like very finicky. So a lot of things, they kind of like, they hurt. And I kind of I don't know, man. I was kind of So it was painful everywhere. So you can kind of like get used to discomfort, is what I'm trying to say, because like maybe like get used to it, because it's not that it stops being uncomfortable, that it stops hurting. It's just that you kind of uh, yeah, how to put it, like you kind of like it becomes like your standard becomes uncomfortable. And I'm thinking about like a lot of like the anger issues I had when I was younger, and a lot of them has to do with connections that were made in my head because of my traumas, but like the things that were happening, so for example, there's a whole conversation, because I feel like also beyond me not kind of like remembering what had happened for years, there was also I guess like a fear of like putting myself out there and then kind of like being discredited for some reason, not being believed. And that was something that really affected me. So it also like made me very sympathetic to people who were going through the same thing. So I kind of like I saw myself in them. So whenever like something happened, something was said about like those cases, it felt like very personal, because like you see how I was kind of like one thing was mirroring the other. So like that was like something that really affected me, which is also something, because I talked about this before, how I had so many different triggers. It was like I walking on eggshells or on a minefield, more likely, because whenever something exploded, like I would kind of like explode. And a lot of it was anger, a lot of it was I think it was mostly anger, because I didn't really know how to properly handle some of my feelings. So things that have to do with me being pain or me being sad, like they translated into anger, kind of like yeah, that's kind of like what was happening. So yeah, so basically what I'm trying to say is that I started to just really see myself in a lot of like things that were happening like in other people, stuff that was kind of like close to me, stuff that I was only seeing through social media. It became very personal, and it's kind of like interesting, because it's kind of like it was this contamination. There was like the initial incident, but it started to kind of like to spread around, like it was just kind of like going all over the place. So for example, some started off with like that person, that individual specific. I'm not talking about anyone specific right now, but it's just like that was something that happened a lot, that I was seeing a lot. So in every one of those cases, I was kind of like there, I was kind of like exposed like that. But like, so suddenly it started expanding. It started, instead of just being something that was said about a specific situation, something that was said about or whatever, like that those things started to kind of like my brain started to make room for them. And then suddenly, instead of I don't know, so like anything that I heard from like, because it was not only like stuff that happened to kind of like groups of people I'm a part of, like that really hurt. That hurt particularly, a little bit more particularly than some other offenses. But it was just a lot of yeah. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is that like the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but I only remember the Rihanna version. But like that is something that I think when I was younger, I was very much like, that is true. Like words can't hurt me. Things can't affect me. And then I started working on through my traumas in therapy. I realized that I was very vulnerable, and it's interesting because like there's just these two types of vulnerability. There's vulnerability that is a little bit more intentional, a little bit more you're willing to be vulnerable, but there's also this kind of like feeling unprotected and all that. But there's also this vulnerability that happens even though you're hiding yourself. In my case, it was anger. I was hiding myself in anger, and so like I was vulnerable. Things were affecting me, but I wasn't dealing directly with the problem. In this case here, like that's pretty much when I started to kind of like deal with things. And yeah, so it's once again easier said than done, but I kind of like I want to get to a point where I can say that thing and really mean it. Like I really want, because I think that's pretty much where I'm transitioning to. I went from being denial about me being vulnerable to kind of like me being openly vulnerable. This was a transition, and sometimes it was happening simultaneously. Sometimes like some topics I could, I was a little bit more open, and then in others, I was still very much up in arms, kind of like kind of like aiming at all, senses. But I think right now I'm at the point where I can actually, I'm actually starting to kind of like grow in the sense of like not being affected by, things happening, things that are being said, because I think just being able to kind of like admit that words hurt me, it is kind of like huge for me, because for so long I was so in denial about that. So I can say it, like, hurt words hurt, but like, and I feel like some things, like, they're never going to stop hurting, but you can handle them better. So like, it's kind of like one of those situations where gets one ear, gets out of the other, and that's kind of like what I want to, because also, like, like this, there is like the upside of like you being kind of like exposed, is that you can kind of like tell what exactly you have, what issues you have to kind of like handle, because life, life sometimes get in the way. Sometimes I'm on a roll. I'm kind of like handling life, I'm doing shit, and like I'm living my life, and then suddenly, poof, life kind of like just drop something on your lap, and you have to handle that. And I do believe that like 5 years from now, I will be doing much better in terms of this. I believe that I will not really be as affected, but 5 years is a long time. But I don't know, I can't see like myself like in the next year being less affected, and I can see myself being less affected. I don't see myself being completely unaffected, and I think that I have to be careful, because I feel like there's a part of me that has a tendency to try to kind of like rub stuff under the rug, instead of like actually engaging with why those things, they hurt the way that they do, and why like they affect me so much. So yeah, so I think that's like my goal for the next 5 years, is to be less affected by things. I want to be less hurt, because things are going to keep on happening. As I said, life is going to keep dropping these packages on your lap, and you have to just handle them. And I kind of like want to be a really good handler. I want to be able to kind of like live my life without these things affecting me. Naturally, I have to take into account like my mental illness. So like, it is not always going to be easy, but I don't need it to be easy. I just need it to be doable. So that's kind of like how I'm intending on approaching life right now. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for today. So anyways, bye.